The average Chinese citizen saves more than 40% of their income, where in the US, it's less than 10%, because the only real choice in China has been to save. There are huge gaps in Chinese healthcare and social security, and the one-child policy that China held on to for so long left generations dependent on just one child to help support them in old age. So just 38% of Chinese GDP comes from its citizens buying stuff, where in the US, it's 70%. That is a problem for China because it makes the country overly reliant on selling stuff to other countries or on the construction of apartment buildings, roads, and bridges, because there comes a point where you've built too much or countries say, we want less of your stuff, which is exactly what is happening today.
It wouldn't matter that the people of China save most of their money instead of spending it. Really, not a big deal until you start demanding, start expecting, start stating in very official documents and speeches that
we will grow at 5% this year and every other year.
Because if you cannot get the people in your country to spend money, how do you grow at that 5%? To grow, you've got to make more, sell more. By definition, there has to be more going on. Money must be changing hands. So when Xi Jinping says,
we will grow at 5% this year,
someone has to make it happen. And for a party that likes to get its way, you, as the head of one of the Chinese provinces, you're not going to let the president down. The first and easiest thing for you to do is build. China at least tripled the length of its roads over the past 25 years. Take all the roads in the US, that's how much asphalt was laid. Every bridge currently in the US, built in 20 years. The entire number of housing units that currently exist in the US, plus an extra 50 million. Rail lines, take Union Pacific, BNSF, and CSX, string out all of their tracks. That's how much rail was built. It's just a staggering amount of infrastructure built in such a short amount of time. Desperately needed to bring the Chinese economy into the modern era, jaw-droppingly impressive. But only so much can be built. There are only so many people to drive on those roads, to live in those houses.
These are China's ghost cities, sprawling, empty spaces.
Entire cities are being created, often in the middle of nowhere.
There's nobody here.
People are convinced that if you keep building, people will come.
If you're unfamiliar with the ghost towns, these were massive complexes of housing, sometimes entirely new cities, millions of housing units that remained completely vacant for years after being built. Some of the ghost towns and roads to nowhere, the coverage was hyperbole, but a lot of it was absolutely true at the time, and some remains true today, which brings the incentive problem into full view.
The basic rule on incentives is you get what you reward for.
Because when an apartment complex is built, money is moved from one group of people to another. For the materials, the labor, marketing, consulting, every piece that goes into building out a city of apartments adds to a number. It counts as economic activity, gets added to GDP, regardless of whether anybody ever lives in the apartment complex. Do it enough times, and a leader of a province in China can point and say, we built all this. And add it all up, my area of the country grew by 8%. As Leland Miller puts it,
you could build a bridge, you tear it down. You build the same bridge, you tear it down. You build the same bridge, and you could have GDP of whatever number you want, at least in the short term, but it's not productive growth. It's not real growth.
Leland Miller runs China Beige Book. I have followed the company for a long time, and I've found time and time again, they get China right. And it's because they collect their own data inside of China through people in China.
We started getting a lot of attention because what we were doing is putting out an alternative to Chinese national statistics. And we were saying, look at their statistics, listen to what they're saying, but listen to us too, because we can see the problems coming that the government doesn't really want to acknowledge most of the time.
You actually have a presence within China to collect data that isn't given out by the Chinese government.
That's exactly right. So China Beige Book is the largest private data collection operation in the world focused on the Chinese economy.
All right, so China's running out of stuff to build, certainly at the same volume as the last 2 decades. Literally millions of vacant housing units. Some of the biggest construction firms and home builders in the country have gone through bankruptcy in the past few years. So to keep growing at the demanded pace, China cannot just keep building.
We'll sell things to the rest of the world.
Could work, but China's already doing a lot of that. Countries have become much less keen to take in all the products being pumped out by China's excess manufacturing capacity. They want to build stuff too. BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes employ almost 1% of Germany's workforce. Germany doesn't want BMW to go out of business. The US doesn't want to lose steel mills. India has sky-high tariffs on smartphones, solar equipment, and even toys coming from China. The walls China is having to climb to get goods into other countries, particularly the biggest countries, are getting higher by the day. Hard to build more infrastructure, hard to sell more to other countries.
China needs to get this line closer to these lines. These lines represent how much people, normal people, you and me, people in Europe, people in Japan, contribute to the economy with our normal everyday spending, just buying and selling stuff. The global average is 56%. It's 68% in the US, 52% in Europe, 56% in Japan. In China,
it's 38%.
The answer for China really is to get its people to buy the stuff its companies make. So why don't they? Why do the people of China refuse to spend more?
First, China's history, certainly its recent history, is one of struggle. Struggle that is etched in the mind of the Chinese people. There have been 12 famines in China big enough to be named over the past 400 years. That's one every 40 or so years, and history's worst famine took the lives of at least 30 million people in China just 60 years ago. The magnitude of that famine is partially due to human choices, but of course people remember it. How could you not? Mentally, it can happen. There just isn't enough farmland in China for how many people need to be fed. And the farmland that is available is prone to natural disasters, particularly flooding and drought. This is where China grows its food. If you were to add it all up, you'd come close to 600 million acres. And depending on a few factors, it takes about 1 acre of land to feed one person for a year. So it makes sense that for every 100 calories consumed in China, about 40 are imported. Just in the United States, an area roughly the size of Utah is used to grow calories to export to China. This is just one example of a lack of abundance. In environments of scarcity, people tend to spend less. Savings is a way to defend against future uncertainty. 2. China's 36-year-long one-child policy meant that today's Chinese parents can only hope to rely on one child to take care of them in old age. Historically, children were the labor force of a household, plowing fields, hunting, to cooking, to canning, everything, to taking care of the parents and grandparents as they got older. Even today, only the wealthiest in America can afford to have 24/7 care for aging parents and grandparents. As unappealing as a nursing home might be when you do become old, they are not available to the vast majority of the rest of the world. They just don't exist. So the care of the elderly, it falls down the age ladder. The child, one child, does it. And increasingly in China, it's the one child taking care of 6 people, the parents and the grandparents, what's called the 4-2-1 model. And when you see the cost of hospitalization in China as an elderly person, the savings make sense. Median income in the country is about $7,000 per year. The cost to stay in the hospital on average in the country, about $1,200. Yes, there is a good amount of money pushed into the Chinese healthcare system. I want to be clear, I'm not saying that China has low-quality healthcare or non-existent healthcare, but it's not equally distributed. If you live in rural China, your healthcare options and costs are significantly different from someone that lives in a Tier 1 city like Shanghai. About 72% of health costs are shouldered by the state, but the rest is out of pocket, with the out-of-pocket expenses landing heavily on catastrophic health events and chronic care. So you have to save. $1,200 is 17% of the median annual income. The median annual income. Half of people are below that number. This cost of healthcare, this being taken care of by just one child with virtually no prospect of long-term care from a facility, drives people to stash money. And importantly, it brings us to number 3. Don't lose money you saved, because the prospects for turning money into more money are nowhere near what many in the West are used to.
Let's take it up a notch. Every month, the average American automatically buys about $500 worth of stocks. Paycheck to 401k, which buys the S&P 500, which buys individual shares of the 500 biggest and best companies in America, making this 537-page document perhaps the biggest reason Americans wake up to green on their screen most mornings. The ability to tax-free invest their money into the biggest and best companies in the world with the promise, the idea at least, that the money invested will turn into more money. An idea so powerful it tripled stock ownership in the US in just 20 years. Only 20% of Americans owned stock in 1979. Today, it's over 60% because of 401ks and IRAs, and no other country is anywhere near that level. Feeding a cycle that creates wealth, that gets people to spend more, that creates companies to make products to sell to those people. People then buy stock in those companies, creating more wealth. The cycle goes on and on and on.
It's different when you think you can leverage your earned wages by letting it compound for years in investments that grow, that turn into more money reliably for almost 100 years. Just think how freeing that is when it comes to spending money. It even has a term, the wealth effect. The more money you feel you have, the more you'll spend. So when we switch our view over to China, this is a place run by a political party that is not interested in increasing its people's wealth through investment. You can see it in policy choices, and you can see it by simply looking at the Chinese stock indexes. Trading at the exact same same level it was at 20 years ago.
You can't bring consumption up by just telling people to spend. The problem with the Chinese model, the economic model before, the Chinese economic model now, is that it suppresses households. It suppresses the private sector in order to benefit the state.
In large part, because the best, most important, most profitable companies in China are owned by the government with no path for a regular person to invest in them. This is one of the more pronounced effects of a communist system that feels very alien to those that live in capitalist countries. Major construction companies, energy companies, defense companies, and banks are quite literally owned and run by the Chinese Communist Party as what are called state-owned enterprises, also known as SOEs. It's like if the US government owned JP Morgan, plus all the other banks, Lockheed Martin, plus all the other defense companies, ExxonMobil, plus all the other oil companies, and a heap of other critical companies. The incredible returns that have compounded on those companies over the years would never have been distributed into retirement plans and regular people's bank accounts. In a way, of course, there's a positive to that. All the efforts of these companies that profit from building things for China are, at least in theory, redirected back into building things for China. But as with most things, there's a trade-off, and that trade-off here is regular people don't get to directly participate. The people don't have agency to direct what is implicitly their share of the return to the things suited for their individual situation. One of the most interesting and powerful economic things the US ever did were those 401k and retirement savings laws. I'm not aware of how that conversation unfolded. You know, was there some quiet conversation in a dark room where a dozen people got together and were like, listen, if they have their money in it too, they'll also want it to go up? I don't know, but that was the effect, for better or worse, because the US has something of an inverse problem where they don't really want to save, they want to consume. It's trade-offs every time. Lots of struggle, not enough kids, nothing to invest in. This is where almost all the global tension with China is. Countries and companies all around the world are like, listen, we've been fairly supportive of your development. We've come to China. We've set up shop, kept tariffs on you extremely low. Part of that was because we thought you wanted to be one of us, to have a big, wealthy population that would buy stuff from us, just as we do from you. I mean, really, this was the rallying cry in the 2000s and 2010s for free trade, how big China's consumer market would become if free trade was embraced. We're talking 1.4 billion people buying stuff from other countries. But 25 years in, your people are barely buying anything from us, and we don't think it's the people's fault, and we're not certain it's because they don't want to. It's because you don't want them to.
Now, there's ways you could fix this, but they're all ways that are completely anathema to the way Xi Jinping runs the country. You could shift assets from the state sector to the household sector, the private sector, give them more capital. You could create a much more robust social safety net. You could appreciate the currency, so you could put more purchasing power in the pockets of households. They're not doing any of this stuff.
So this increasing tension between China and the rest of the world is not going anywhere until they can get this line to start moving up. That is the whole ball game. Even a modest move from 38% to 48% would come close to balancing China's trade with the rest of the world. We have another big video on China coming out next. Leyland Miller will be back. Everyone say goodbye to Leyland. I highly recommend following China Beige Book on Twitter. It's punchy stuff, humorous. Link is in the description, and hit that subscribe button. We have so much good stuff coming up, and it's the best way to support the channel. I'll see you in the next video. See ya.